In a faraway village, there lived a man named Brian. He believed strongly in charity and helping others. Everyone in the village admired him for his kindness. Even though Brian himself often had very little to eat, he never hesitated to help someone in need. One morning, as Brian sat down to eat the food he had prepared, there was a knock on his door. He opened it to find an old beggar. "Son, please give me something to eat. I've been hungry since yesterday and can barely walk now," said the beggar weakly. "Come in, uncle. Sit with me and we'll eat together," Brian said warmly. The beggar shook his head. "This little food won't fill my stomach. Don't worry about me, son. I'll beg elsewhere. You go ahead and eat." But Brian insisted. "Uncle, you take this food. I'll manage. I ate last night, so I'll be fine." Saying this, Brian handed his plate to the beggar. The man quickly began eating with both hands as if he hadn't eaten in days. After finishing, the beggar blessed Brian. "May God always keep you happy. You gave me your meal, even though you have so little yourself. Such kind-hearted people are rare these days. May you always be blessed." The beggar left, but Brian was now hungry. He checked his kitchen, but there wasn't a single grain left. "Oh, well," he thought, "I'll figure something out. At least the poor man's hunger's gone. That's enough to give me peace." Brian left his house to look for work. As he walked, he saw Mr. Mark, a farmer from the village, struggling to carry sacks of grain. Mark called out to his wife, "I've been carrying these sacks alone for so long. Let me call Brian. That fool is always ready to help people, even though he doesn't have a penny in his pocket." Mark waved to Brian. "Hey, Brian, how are you? Can you lend me a hand? I need to carry 10 more sacks from the field to my house." "Of course, Mr. Mark. I'd be happy to help," Brian replied cheerfully. Mark smirked. "What a simpleton," he thought. "He's doing my work for free." Brian spent hours helping Mark carry the heavy sacks, even though he hadn't eaten all day. Finally, when the work was done, Mark said, "Thank you, Brian. If you hadn't helped, I would have been working until nightfall." Exhausted and starving, Brian decided to buy food on credit from a local shopkeeper. He prepared a meal and ate before going to bed. The next morning, Brian was woken up by the sound of someone crying outside. He opened the door and saw his neighbor, Benny, hitting his wife, Clara. "Stop this, Benny," Brian said. "Why are you hitting your wife?" "She didn't listen to me," Benny shouted angrily. "Stay out of this, Brian." Brian stepped forward and said firmly, "It's wrong to hit your wife, especially in front of the whole village. Everyone is watching." An older woman, Martha, stepped in. "Brian, why are you wasting your breath? Benny drinks too much and fights with his wife every morning." "Shut up, old woman," Benny snapped. "Mind your own business." Brian had had enough. He grabbed Benny's hand and slapped him hard across the face. The crowd of villagers burst into applause. "Serves him right," they shouted. "A man who hits his wife isn't a real man." Humiliated, Benny threatened, "If I don't get money by tonight, I'll hit her again, and no one will stop me." Brian threw some money at Benny. "Take this and leave. But if you ever lay a hand on your wife again, I'll make sure you end up in jail." The villagers praised Brian for standing up to Benny. One woman said, "Brian, you are so kind-hearted. You always help everyone. We need someone like you as our village leader." Others agreed. "Yes, Brian should be the new village chief. Unlike Mr. Simon, Brian cares about the people. He'll bring progress to our village." Word soon reached Simon, the current village chief. He was furious. "Brian thinks he can take my position? Let's see how he likes it when I'm done with him." Simon hatched a plan. He ordered his men to mix bad grains into the village's food supplies. Then during the food distribution, Simon acted friendly. Brian, it's so nice to see you as the new leader. I'm sure the villagers will finally get good quality rations now, he said with fake kindness. The villagers initially felt happy. For the first time, we got full rations. Brian is so honest, they said. But the next day, chaos broke out. The villagers discovered the grains were spoiled. They gathered angrily at Brian's house. Brian, we trusted you. How could you give us bad food? They demanded. Brian was heartbroken. I didn't do anything wrong. I would never cheat you, he pleaded. But no one believed him. Even Martha, the elderly woman, said, Brian, we made a mistake by choosing you as our leader. You should leave the village. Simon took advantage of the situation and fueled their anger. Yes, kick Brian out. He's a fraud. Heartbroken, Brian was forced to leave the village. He wandered far away and sat under a tree, thinking, I've always helped everyone. How could they believe I'd harm them? This must be Simon's doing, but they didn't even give me a chance to explain. Meanwhile, Simon and his men celebrated. With Brian gone, I'm back in power, Simon laughed. Days later, Simon's servant overheard two strangers in the forest talking about Brian has committed suicide. One of them said, Poor Brian. He left because the villagers blamed him unfairly. The servant rushed to tell Simon, Master, people are talking about Brian has committed suicide. They believe he's gone for good. Simon replied smugly, Good. The villagers will forget him soon enough. The servant rushed to tell Simon, Master, people are talking about Brian. They believe he's gone for good. Simon replied smugly, Good. The villagers will forget him soon enough. But one evening, as darkness fell, Simon saw a shadow outside his house. It looked like Brian. Is that Brian's ghost? He whispered, trembling. His servant panicked. It must be his ghost. I'm leaving. I don't want to die. As the figure came closer, Simon fell to his knees. Brian, please forgive me. I'll confess everything to the villagers. Just don't hurt me. It was no ghost, it was Brian himself. You people may be considering me a ghost, but I had spread the news of my suicide falsely so that I could catch the thief. Tell the truth, Simon, or face the consequences, he said firmly. That night, Simon gathered the villagers and confessed. I was the one who spoiled the rations, not Brian. I wanted to ruin his reputation. The villagers were shocked. We made a mistake, Brian. Please forgive us, they said. The villagers expelled Simon from the village and made Brian their leader again. From that day on, Brian led the village with honesty and kindness.